No stranger to us here at 98.5, an author, a blogger and a mentor. Elaine took us through a series on creativity last year, and she's written a series of books collectively known as the Beautiful Books. And look, though Elaine has written a lot of non-fiction books on many subjects, she's dabbled successfully in fiction as well, and her latest book is called Amazing Grace, and it's about to be launched. And Elaine Fraser joins me this morning. Hi, Elaine.
Good morning, JD.
Great to catch up with you again.
Yes, great to catch up with you too.
It's been a while, but you've been working on this book for quite a while as well. It's a confronting story about sexual identity. That is a confronting issue. Why do you think that we need to tackle this important issue?
I started writing about this girl called Grace about 3 years ago. And at first she was just going to be a typical teenager, have a few different issues. And the more I got to know Grace as a character, the more I realised that she was having trouble with her sexuality. Now, I know I'm talking about a character as if she's a real person, but when I write, that's what happens in my head. And all around me were people I knew who were struggling with their sexuality or had children who were struggling with their sexuality. And every time I talked to people in that situation, I felt this sense of pain and confusion and even a bit of confrontation with faith and sexuality were the two things that mainly came out. And as I was writing and listening to people talk about these issues, the more the character grew and the more I knew that God was asking me to write about this topic.
How do you feel about writing about this topic? What's the journey been like for you going through and writing this book?
When I'm at home alone writing about it, reading about it, talking to people, researching, it was so interesting because it took me on a journey I never expected. It hasn't really changed my views on the issue so much, but what it has changed is my view of people. And I've realised that this is not an issue. Sexual identity is not an issue. We're talking about people's lives. And when we're talking about people's lives, that is where we come to a cropper sometimes, because if we are looking at it as a moral issue, right, wrong, black, white, sometimes that just polarises people. And as we can see in society at the moment with the discussion about the marriage plebiscite, for instance, we get these polarised positions. But what I wanted to write in this story, and it is fiction, it's not a true story, is a story about someone who is really trying to work out their faith and sexuality and come to a conclusion that grace is, and God's grace, is where we need to sit. So in all this conversation, all these arguments, all the polarisation, I wanted to find a place in the middle somewhere where we could all just sit down together and have a conversation, not a huge argument.
My guest is Elaine Fraser. We're talking about her new book, Amazing Grace, which is about to be launched. The book's character is called Grace. Grace doesn't make a decision about her sexuality in the book, really, but she quite openly questions it with her friends. What made you write that character in that way and have that approach?
Again, as a writer and looking at my character as a person, I didn't feel like I had the right to make that decision for Grace. I know that sounds really strange when you're the one actually writing the book. You can write anything you like. But I also felt that it wasn't the issue of what she decided in the end. It was the way she was thinking about it and the journey that she was on in trying to figure this out. She told her friends, she had various reactions. She was bullied. Her mother couldn't cope with it at first. But also the length of time over the book is really only a couple of months. So that's not long enough for anyone to make a huge life decision in any arena. So I deliberately finished the book at this point. And the ending came to me with a conversation with a boy from overseas, actually, who I had a 2-hour Skype discussion with about his journey with faith and sexuality. And he said, I've come to the conclusion that God loves me. He loves me just as I am. And now what I have to do is work out what I have to do with my sexuality. And I thought to myself, that is the ending of my book.
Well, Okay, well, don't tell us the exact ending of the book.
No.
The book is called Amazing Grace. Elaine Fraser is the author of it. We'll be back with more about this book and Elaine's journey in writing it in just a moment on 98.5. Elaine, it's this journey of Grace, the main character, and her struggling with faith and sexuality. But this is not a book that is telling young people how to think, is it?
It's not telling people how to think about a particular issue. What it is trying to do, and this is what I used to try and do in my teaching situation, was to actually get people to think carefully about things and not to just jump in. Because once you look at things from one dimensional point of view, you have tunnel vision, and you become so ingrained in that way of thinking. I wanted kids to look at this issue as something that is multifaceted, that I've got characters who were gay and made a decision that they didn't want to live a life in that direction, and they formed another type of relationship. I have characters who are happily involved in same-sex relationships. I've got characters who are totally opposed to same-sex relationships. I've got the whole range. But my character, she's looking at it all and looking at the pros and cons of everything, I guess, and then thinking, well, is that right for my life? Does that fit into my values? Does that fit into my paradigm? Does that fit into my beliefs? And that's what we need to do as Christians or as any person. We need to look at decisions in our life and how does that fit into what I actually believe? And that is where the problem is. It's not necessarily just the sexuality. We all have these issues in our life that we struggle with, we wrestle with our faith. And this is what the story is really about. So when people say to me, oh, you've written a book about, sexual identity and whatever, it is, but it's also about wrestling with your faith. Because I think if faith is worth having, it's worth fighting for, fighting with, engaging with. We have that picture in the Bible many times of people wrestling with their faith and wrestling with God and really working out, because that sort of faith, thinking faith, faith that is hard fought for, faith that is worked through, is worth fighting for. And that's where you get your strength from. So, yes, I am sort of saying I'm not telling anyone what's right or wrong, and that is where I'm going to get into trouble. I actually wrote in the book, this book is, I'm going to be too liberal for some, and I'm going to be too conservative for others. And I'm actually happy to be in that middle ground. It doesn't mean I'm wavering. It doesn't mean I haven't got my own opinions. What it means is I'm actually wrestling with this as an issue, not for my own personal life, but for people around me who are wrestling with it, whether they're parents of children with gay children or whether they are someone who's struggling with their own sexuality. I don't think it's fair to just say right, wrong, black, white, forget about it. Just, I say it's not that simple. We need to be able to work these things out and talk them through in our churches, in our homes, in our youth groups, in our schools, and actually have conversations about this issue where it's not polarised, where we're not yelling at each other.
Yeah. Amazing Grace is a book by Elaine Fraser. The main character, Grace, is a teenage girl, but this book, some people might think it's for teenage girls to read, but would you like to see a broader spectrum of people reading it so that those conversations happen?
That's a really good question, because I found with my two previous books, I actually have a theme that comes through it with mothers and daughters. And I actually had a woman tap me on the shoulder at church one night and she said, oh, I think you've got a book that might help me. Anyway, long story short, she was talking about my first novel, Perfect Mercy, and the mother and the daughter have this strained relationship. And I seem to have picked up on this theme in each of the novels I've written so far. And I think as parents, sometimes we don't know how to talk to our children because we're too confronted by things, or we don't know how to approach things. So the novels, I think, because I'm a mother of young adults, I think part of me has come out in this book, and part of it is saying sometimes I don't know how to talk to my kids about these difficult things. And so I'm sort of having some of these difficult conversations through the characters in my book. So I think parents will be able to read this as well and perhaps begin conversations with their own children about relationships. And I don't just mean sexual relationships, I mean friendships and relationships between parents and children, and what about faith, and what about this, and what about that. That's what I hope people will get out of this. So yeah, it's a young adult novel, but it could be read by parents as well.
Okay. With all of that in the background there, how do you feel about launching it on Wednesday night? I mean, you personally, is it a daunting thing to launch a new book anyway, whatever the subject?
I haven't found it daunting in the past, but this one I've found daunting because of the topic. It's actually out a year later than it should be because I kept sending it out to different people to read and give opinions, and I kept rewriting things and getting it back. But I really feel like God has told me to write this. I think it's time to release it. And I think in the climate of the current discussion about the marriage plebiscite, as I said before, I think it's on the discussion radar, and it's only going to become more so in the next few months and years. And so I think I'm ready to release it. I feel peaceful about it, but it has been quite a wrestle for me to actually release this book.
Amazing Grace is being launched this Wednesday the 12th, and we wish you well with the launch of that.
Great.
So people are going to go along and be part of that, which is wonderful. There are some details and links for Elaine's website on my show page at 98.5.com. Elaine Fraser's Amazing Grace. Look for it in the bookshop soon. Well done, and God bless you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, JD. Thanks very much.
98.5.